know who I am?
I knew that The Departed was based on Infernal Affairs, this Chinese film that had come out around the time when I got the script, but it was immediately something that was attractive because, of course, Martin Scorsese's involvement.
The script in this picture was based on these extraordinary Chinese films and Hong Kong cinema.
Family's all criminals except for the old man, huh?
But it's an attitude that one could translate to another ethnic group in a different place. And so for me, it's more about the people and more about the attitude of life, the philosophy of life that they have.
They would say we could become cops or criminals. What I'm saying is this: when you're facing a loaded gun, what's the difference?
It is a gangster movie, but it deals with a different sort of set of circumstances in a completely different environment.
Yeah, well, that's it, basically.
He's made all these kinds of movies throughout his career. He's the king of movies like this.
And so I tend to gravitate towards these stories. It's just turned out that way. Although if you look at the amount of pictures I made, there's only about 5 of them out of 20 pictures that are dealing with that world. But apparently they get a lot of attention. Where I grew up was a small area downtown off of the Bowery between Houston and Canal Street called Little Italy. And all the Italians that migrated there from the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century couldn't take advantage of the opportunities a new country afforded you, particularly this country, because of the nature of who these people were. They had to walk a line without education, living in their neighborhood, not knowing any English, speaking very little English.
When we talk about Martin Scorsese, you have to start with his upbringing in Little Italy. It was a tightly knit immigrant community where the people did not entirely trust the establishment.
The sense of morality came mainly from the family. There were a lot of really hard-working stiffs, like my father and my uncles. They all went to work. And my father was sort of always walking the line between being very respectful towards certain kinds of people and living a normal life. They worked out their own system, and a lot of this was coming from the villages, in the tradition of village elders. A village elder would come in, help alleviate a problem between a father and a daughter, a son-in-law and a father-in-law, and this sort of thing. Ultimately, I would think, and I'm not a total authority on this, but a lot of these power structures were set up within what became organized crime.
You're gonna pay? Just give us the fucking money!
I think it's been well established that Marty has a beyond working knowledge of organized crime and the mafia from where he grew up in New York.
There were the kids who were sort of being primed to go into organized crime.
Never rat on your friends, and always keep your mouth shut.
That we kind of were friends with, but didn't really go along with. And I was sort of one who was going back and forth to these different groups and became like an observer and sort of lived by my wits because of my asthma. I couldn't run, I couldn't fight, I couldn't do anything. Basically, they kept me in the school. I went to movie theaters, and they kept me in the church. So I was considered like this sort of a freak that was kept in the corner, and yet I was able to still bounce back and forth between these different groups and live these lives. Ultimately, it's reflected in Mean Streets, really, of myself and my friends.
Listen, Tony, I gotta borrow your car. We ought to take a ride. We shouldn't be around here now. Okay. Don't go driving around, go to a movie or something. This is no good, all right? You know what I mean?
This is his life. Basically, the Harvey Keitel character, this tortured Italian Roman Catholic who wants to do something good in his life and doesn't know how because the people that he lives with live by a code of the street.
You live with it. You live with that violence. You don't... The thing to do is not to get in the violence. Or not to be the subject of the violence. Come on. If you couldn't really stand up to them, if you couldn't physically stand up to them, you had to sort of gain some sort of respect by, by using your head, really.
When you look back on Scorsese's influences, he's growing up, he's watching movies all the time, and movies, as a child, were really something exotic, took him to another place, and really interesting, maybe even evil, maybe violent things were going on.
of my fondest memories, my father taking me to see a double bill of Public Enemy and Little Caesar. Public Enemy, directed by William Wellman, Jimmy Cagney, and Little Caesar, directed by Mervyn LeRoy, starring Edward G. Robinson.
Sam, you can dish it out, but you're getting so you can't take it no more. You're through.
My father liked the Warner Brothers pre-code pictures. Warner Brothers was always tougher with their genre pictures. Even if there was Angels with Dirty Faces, they were still tougher.
So the movies he's attracted to tend to be movies like White Heat.
I love you, Cody. I love you.
Let Ma die.
No.
Yeah. Didn't even raise a finger to help her. You just stood there and watched Big Ed kill her.
Like Public Enemy.
You dirty double-crossing.
In Public Enemy, William Wellman did something very special. He got an okay from the studio to make the picture as tough as possible. Interestingly, in Public Enemy, none of the violence is on screen. It's all off screen. The killing of Putty Nose. The camera pans away. You see the reaction on Tom Powers' friend.
Big and fat, slipped on the ice and broke her.
The ending is probably the strongest ending of any of those movies. They told his mother that he's coming back home from the hospital. His mother's upstairs preparing for her son, and she's putting the bed together, and his brother goes to answer the door. And I think, the famous ending is with the body is just delivered and just hits the floor. And the brother just looks down, sees he's dead, and then slowly walks towards the camera. And he's going upstairs to tell his mother that, indeed, her son is home, but he's dead. And he shoots in a very, some people criticize crude way. I don't see it as crude. I just see it as straight, honest. And Cagney, of course, his performance made him a star.
Why, that dirty, no-good, yellow-bellied stool. I'm going to give her that putty nose right in the head the first time I see him.
Yeah? You and who else?
Cagney, this out-of-control person. You don't know what he's going to do next, but you think, I better stand back just a little bit.
Sonny, you're a real fucking mutt. You know the money we spend in this fucking...
Come on, don't be like that.
What do you mean, don't be like that?
Joe Pesci wasn't born, but, he was coming, and this was what we were going to see.
What the fuck are you looking at? You fucking...
Goodfellas relates directly to the Roaring Twenties.
Sending you over 100 cases in the morning.
I don't need 100 cases.
You'll take them. You don't want to hurt our feelings, do you?
What's interesting for me was that it was the day-to-day life, hour to hour, of a foot soldier in the mob.
Henry, I need suits, Henry, not coats. Suits are coming Thursday. I know, but this is the middle of the fucking summer. What am I going to do with fur coats?
In White Heat, also, you get something that ties into The Departed.
My orders was nobody was to leave. Well, that might go for hoods like him. When I got a reason to leave, I leave.
Edmund O'Brien is an undercover guy in this movie.
A cop. How do you like that, boys?
And we went for it. I went for it. Treated him like a kid brother. And I was going to split 50-50 with a cop.
I never felt very sympathetic towards the Edmund O'Brien character. I never kind of liked him for some reason. Not that you like Cody, you're kind of fascinated by Cody.
Here's to us, top of the world.
And heart goes out to him, especially when he's sitting on his mother's lap.
Don't let him see you like that. Might give some of them ideas.
Always thinking about your Cody, aren't you?
But he's a monster. He's played by Cagney.
How you doing, Parker?
Stuffy in here. I need some air.
Oh, stuffy, huh? I'll give it a layer.
You can't help it when people like that play those parts. You're attracted to that guy, that character.
Catch.
And that is what Scorsese's feeling too. He wants that energy for this madness. He's attracted and repelled at the same time.
The other one was interesting is Scarface with Paul Muni.
Listen, little boy. In this business, there's only one law you gotta follow to keep out of trouble.
The film was very beautifully made, and part of the game that they played in the film was that when anybody was going to be killed, there was always an X in the frame somewhere.
Tony, don't! Tony!
So in this film, we put X's in many different places.
Fucking rat trap!
That's a direct reference to Scarface, more for fun and for those who know. And then the other direct reference to Scarface is that there's a scene where they go to the opera, Francis Costello. That's a reference to Paul Muni in Scarface, because every time he went to kill somebody, he whistled the sextet from Lucia, and you knew somebody was going to get killed.
Hello, Louis.
I ain't so tough.
What I saw in those movies was the rise and the fall. The fall was most important.
Hated man! Top of the world!
Rocky, don't. Don't.
I'll do anything.
Oh, no, you won't. You got your last chance, and you take this with you. I never let go of those papers. All you had to do was bump me off.
Particularly people who were, in a way, had some of their lives dictated by people like this. At a certain point, it's like watching the fall of a king. The king may have been benevolent to you at certain times, but they still have the power over you, and they are human, and they will fall.
Edward G. Robinson in Little Caesar. I mean, how do you forget that death scene?
Mother of mercy. Is this the end of Rico?
Cagney and Bogart died in those movies. There was no happy ending and the ribbon tied up and over.
He used to be a big shot.
These are major influences on his career, and I think good influences, because it's too easy today in a formula-based Hollywood to just turn out the same thing over and over again.
That ain't our beer.
These are the people he knew on the streets.
You're yellow.
Anything you see that connected you, what you knew on the screen, gave you a special relationship to that picture.
He'll tell you about On the Waterfront being that kind of a movie. He knew those people. Elia Kazan had made a movie about the guys in his neighborhood. Maybe he could do that too.
This was an explosion of something happening in American society that was just bursting out. A new kind of reality found itself on the screen. But it didn't stop with American movies. I became even more excited by foreign films, the opening up of other cultures through foreign films. And once I got there, once I began to see the early Ingmar Bergman films, all the Kurosawa, all of this stuff made me think that I could tell a story. It gave me a passion to tell a story.
Hey, officer, can I get my hat? Go. Can I call my wife?
And motion pictures were getting not easier to make, but more accessible to make. And the equipment getting smaller and smaller. Anything was possible, so why not just try?
I'm gonna tie one of his legs to that Cadillac bumper over there. I'm gonna tie the other to the Ford, and boom!
Mean Streets basically opens at the New York Film Festival. And people were saying, well, who is this guy? But nobody knew. And then they sat there and they watched this and they said, what was that? It's that kind of movie. And you want to know more. You want to say, did he do anything else before this? Is he going to do something else after it? Who is this guy? And I'm telling you, that happens very, very rarely. I'm sitting here. I'm a movie critic. I've done it for 20 years. I don't see this very often, so that was a really exciting time.
There has certainly been an evolution in filmmaking from the gangster films back in the 1930s and 40s to the gangster movies that we have today. They're so much more realistic. In Martin Scorsese's films, the portrayal of gangster life.
Henry, here's an arm.
Very funny, guys. It's a wing.
The portrayal of the individual psychology of each gangster is incredibly well done.
You haven't even called or anything. Where have you been?
Well, Mom, I've been working nights.
And?
Well, tonight we were out late. We took a ride out to the country, and we hit one of those deers. That's where the blood came from, I told you.
Whether he goes back in time in Gangs in New York, or whether he's bringing a contemporary story to life, as in The Departed, he always tells the truth, and sometimes it's pretty brutal.
The violence in my movies, it's kind of matter of fact, and it's not glamorized.
What do you want, fucko? You want some?
Oh, hey!
I've got to tell you, I put the violence in my films the way I experienced, the way I saw it at the corner of my eye.
You wasted 8 fucking aprons on this guy.
And I know the visceral reaction I had. And that's the only way I put it on the screen, to be as truthful as possible. It's not for everybody. These are R-rated pictures.
All right. Fucking move.
There's a lot of use of vulgar language. There's a lot of violence. It's not gratuitous, in my opinion. This is the way it is. And to clean it up, I think, wouldn't do service to what Martin Scorsese is actually trying to portray.
Mean Streets comes out in 1973, and the reaction is extraordinary. But this is in the middle of Midtown Manhattan, with a lot of people who would never, even if they were shocked, admit to it. Not me, I'm not shocked, no. But of course, everyone was. Everyone was saying, well, this is moving it to another level.
Hey, lady, I'm sorry, lady. I didn't mean it. I swear to God.
Mean Streets is about what the character says at the beginning about religion, about atoning for your sins.
Pain in hell has two sides. The kind you can touch with your hand, the kind you can feel in your heart, your soul, the spiritual side.
And one doesn't atone for the sin inside a little edifice that's called a church, but you do it in the streets. And you do it with the people you deal with every day. And how does one deal with that moral concept in a world that is corrupt?
Watch yourself. Don't spoil anything. Honorable men go with honorable men.
There's always in him a sense of a character who's trying to do the right thing.
Charlie, this is business. Well, be realistic, Michael. Where's he to come up with $3,000, huh? Let's work something out.
In Mean Streets, Charlie, the Harvey Keitel character, really wants to take care of De Niro's Johnny Boy.
Fucking Edzo. You stupid bastard. Were you going to use that?
Usually, what I'm interested in, I find that it's about people, basically good people, forced to do bad things.
Hi, Mom. What do you think?
Because they have no other choice.
Look at my shoes. Aren't they great?
My God. You look like a gangster.
And so, Scorsese gives us not what he wants us to believe, not what he's saying to the audience. All you young people out there, this is the job for you. You got to do it. But how people get sucked into this.
Why, will you get permission from your mother?
How many pounds you need?
What? Where'd you get those cigarettes?
Get him out of here.
Get him out of here.
To me, Goodfellas is the all-time classic of what organized crime is. I think that's the most accurate portrayal of any movie that I've seen on organized crime.
You know, Goodfellas comes out in 1990, and whenever there's a mob movie of any kind, it has to come up against The Godfather, and people saying, well, you know, wasn't The Godfather the ultimate mob movie? Well, it may be, but The Godfather in many ways is romanticized.
Very, very few mobsters wind up like Vito Corleone in The Godfather. Most of them either wind up dead, they wind up in jail, or they wind up completely broke.
I thought it was very accurate. He captured the whole lifestyle to perfection. It was really kind of eerie to watch it. It was probably one of the best movies ever on the criminal lifestyle.
Anyway, you know what reminds me, I need this knife. I'm gonna take this, it's okay? Okay, yeah. I just need it for a
Bring
little
it back, though, you know.
It captures the venality of these guys. Obviously, the Joe Pesci character, and that was a sociopath.
Pesci was brilliant, and is always brilliant, in depicting this particular type of individual.
I used to call him Spit Shine Tommy. I swear to God, he'd make your shoes look like fucking mirrors.
Who has deep feelings of inadequacy.
No more shines, Billy.
Constantly trying to compensate for it.
I'm only kidding with you.
Sometimes you don't sound like you're kidding. You know, there's a lot of people around.
Making his character very disturbing.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to offend you.
I'm sorry, too. It's okay, no problem.
Okay, salute. Now go home and get your fucking shine box.
Motherfucking...
The whole notion of respect, I think, is very, very important and brought out really, really well, particularly in Goodfellas.
No movie about crime, no movie about drugs, no movie about any of these things that get us into trouble that doesn't show the very real attraction of these things is lying. And Scorsese doesn't lie. There's a scene in Goodfellas that's so key in terms of Scorsese's work. And it's not just technically one of the great scenes, although it is, but it's more than that. It's about the attraction, and it's the scene in which Henry Hill takes his girlfriend to the Copacabana in New York, through a side door, down a very dark tunnel, into what seems like the most glamorous version of hell I would ever see in movies. He's in a gang that takes care of him, makes sure he does get to the Copacabana when he wants to impress a girl.
What do you do?
What?
What do you do?
I'm in construction.
Casino set in Las Vegas, which I think is every mobster's dream of what their life may have been back on the mean streets of New York. It's gambling, it's women, there's violence always, but the sense of I could hit the jackpot.
In The Departed, we're looking at something a lot less glamorous. The Irish mob in Boston.
I ain't gonna hurt you.
I actually get the sense that he wanted to portray this in the most accurate manner to his audiences.
When you're working with somebody that is as intense and passionate about what they do and works on a certain level of, I don't want to say perfection, because what is perfection, but when somebody is a perfectionist like he is, it ramps everything and everyone around you up to a different level.
One day in particular, we've been filming from early in the morning, and there was a scene that occurred. Martin Sheen hands Leonardo a slip of paper, presumably with an amount of money on it, and Leo nods his head in an affirmative manner.
We have a question. Do you want to be a cop, or do you want to appear to be a cop?
After several shoots, Martin says, "Cut, get Duffy up here." He said, "How much should we pay him?" "I'm thinking of paying him $25,000. I asked if it was a one-time payment or was Leo going to be set for life. He said, no, this is a one-time payment. I said, all right, why don't we give him $100,000? He says, no, that's too much. I'm not paying him $100,000. I said, all right, let's give him 50. We'll split the difference. He said, okay, we'll give him 50.
So what do I do? There's money behind this operation. You won't be paid as a regular cop, but there's a bonus involved. Tax-free.
The fact of what he's paid is never revealed in the movie. The audience never knows. It's irrelevant, but in Martin's mind, he had to know at that moment what was real and what wasn't real.
Do you know who I am?
No. The Departed depicts gang life in an Irish ethnic enclave.
They love the dear silver that shines in her hair. I love the dear fingers that I'll worn for me.
The important thing to remember is different ethnic gangsters are all the same in terms of their psychology, but they bring their ethnicity with them.
You want me to catch a beating? I'm gonna catch a beating if I go back again like last week. See this guy? You see this guy? This guy don't want you to have the money.
It felt really weird to have Marty watching that scene where I beat up two Italian guys, which I found very sacrilegious. It's a completely different environment. It's a completely different world. This is the sort of Irish underworld, you know?
You fellas come from Providence?
If there's any business where we come from, is it?
Delivering cannolis or something?
Say, Scorsese is doing a crime drama. I don't see how people could resist buying a ticket to that movie. So when you say Scorsese and crime drama, that seems to be enough.
It's every actor's dream to be able to be on one of his sets. I learned a lot watching him shoot this and watching him decide how he was going to shoot it.
That point. Cut. That point, the guys come out.
He's always going to give us another side of it or show us another side of how the mob operates. Scorsese is always the kind of director that's going to say, you don't know you want this yet, but I'm going to show you, and it might take me 3 movies until you realize it, but you will. And that's something to be admired.
The persona of Whitey Bulger is mythical in South Boston. A lot of that has to do with fear. There's no question for the better part of 3 decades he terrorized this area.
James Whitey Bulger became one of Boston's most notorious gangsters.
The criminal element in that town, he basically controlled, you know, for a generation. Nothing happened in that town that he didn't have a piece of.
A lot of people's lives are ruined because of Whitey Bulger. Not only murdered, but I mean families get their sons and daughters addicted to drugs. A lot of that happened on Whitey's watch.
The story has had so many twists and turns. The sad thing is that so much time has passed that a lot of people who were corrupt, a lot of people did get away.
It'll be very difficult for many people from this area to see The Departed and not immediately notice the parallels of both stories.
And in no way do we say that Francis Costello, played by Jack Nicholson in the film, is directly patterned after Whitey Bulger. But we put it this way, we felt comfortable in the character, and we felt comfortable in the situation because we knew it to be true. We take that as a touchstone, so to speak. First of all, let's start with the script. The script in this picture was by William Monahan, and that's what got me involved in it. Based on these extraordinary Chinese films and Hong Kong cinema.
I wasn't, no more than Marty, was I just going to do a remake. So it was important to personalize it.
This lead came from Queen's Undercover Guy. I'm gonna have a smoke right now. You want to have a smoke? You don't smoke, do you? Right? What do you want, all those fitness freaks?
And, you know, I've got a bit to say about the milieu that it's set in, which is angry young men from Boston.
He was able to, I believe, draw upon things that he'd seen in the neighborhood. And hearing stories about the different gangs that were around Boston at that time, and took a lot upon the real historical facts of the Boston crime scene. So he was able to capture this unique area in the United States and make a really fantastic script.
It's interesting because he created a world with the police and with the, I guess, wise guys in that area that was so unique to me that I felt he really captured an attitude. And so for me, it's more about the people and more about the philosophy of life that they have.
Southie is kind of a unique place. Everyone who's from here was proud of who they are, proud of where they came from.
1, 2, big jumping,
A place where, growing up, family was very important.
The Shaughnessy's, they had 11 kids here. Next door, the Powers is the first Powers family had 6.
I bought my mother's house. You're in your mother's house.
They want us there or not.
Whether they want us there or not, but we're all back.
Irish people in Boston. They're very Irish, they're very faith-based, they're very loyal, and there is community solidarity in Southie.
It's just, you can't explain. If you're not from here, you don't understand what I'm saying.
You know, with acting, you can either make it up or you can go figure out how people really do it. I'm from Boston, so there are a lot of cultural things and things that are second nature to me.
I mean, Boston there's only one. My growing up there has an effect on everything that I do. I didn't have to do much homework. I mean, instead, the only difference was I was playing one of the cops that used to arrest me all the time.
South Boston's like a big unruly family, is what it is. It's, you have a lot of fighting going on and stuff, and a lot of squabbles and stuff.
Sometimes you'd fight 3 times on the way home just to get home. You'd have 3 different corners you had to go through. So by the time I'm in the 4th grade, I was a pretty tough little kid. I could handle myself pretty well. And once people understood that you could handle yourself, then they didn't bother you again.
But at least you woke up the next morning. It was fist fights. People weren't shooting or stabbing each other back then. That was frowned upon.
It wasn't that you had to win every fight, every street fight that you were involved in, but you had to at least participate. If you didn't, you maintained no status in your neighborhood.
I remember when I read the original script and was talking about the busing strikes at Southie High and all that stuff. My dad was a Teamster and drove a bus then, and it has a reputation of being a kind of tough place.
And there's an allusion to this in the film. The busing of the 70s changed and began to break up the tightness of the groups in Southie.
Boston public schools were pretty much segregated, and the courts decided to desegregate the schools by ordering busing.
I think they were stereotyped back in the 60s and 70s as being a racist community, and that was magnified at the start of busing. They just were not going to stand by and have a federal judge or a federal edict take away their liberties of choosing where their children should go to school. The people of Southie, by nature, they don't really welcome outsiders. They can have their own internal beefs amongst themselves, but don't let anyone from outside come in and question their sovereign authority.
There's sort of an island mentality there. There's a feeling that South Boston was different than any other neighborhood in the city. And that sort of the pride and the insularity there also fed an awful lot of denial.
People believed Whitey was protecting the community. And people really felt like he may be a gangster, but he's our gangster. South Boston isn't the kind of place where people are going to run to the FBI or the Boston police and report, what's happening. They tend to handle things within the community.
I definitely needed to go to Boston and walk around the neighborhoods and get the feeling of the people. And there was somebody that I hung around a lot with on the film who really helped me perfect the accent and took me around the old neighborhoods and told me old stories of, Whitey Bulger and the whole sort of scene that went on there.
I was hired to work as the technical consultant for The Departed. The vast majority of my career was spent as a detective and specifically the investigation of the Irish mob headed by James Whitey Bulger.
There's only one guy from Boston, an Irish gangster who ran the whole thing. That's Whitey Bulger.
Whitey was famous. Everybody just knew about it in Boston.
I mean, you're always going to hear stories about Southie and stories about Whitey.
Want to tell them about the story about the cat?
Oh, yeah. We were 9 or 10 years old, and my buddy says, "Hey, Bo, can you help me out? Can you do me a favor?" And I was like, "Well, okay. So we got to bury a cat." I said, "You're kidding me. Where'd it come from?" "It's Whitey's." I said, "Oh, my God." So we ended up doing it quick, and then
How to do it.
the next thing you know, he comes up to me later, Kevin, and here's a double sawbuck. This is from the big guy, Whitey. And I'm like, I'm 9 years old, we're from the projects, 20 bucks.
The
I'm
people
put it right in my
that
pocket.
live in those condos now that are there don't even know the cat's there.
Well, my father did a lot of the investigation regarding Bulger and Connolly and all that kind of stuff. At one point, he had to bug their car, and they came out and got in it while he was under the car bugging it. And they ended up driving away, and they didn't notice that he was there, so he got away that time.
Break it up!
But The Departed is by no means a Whitey Bulger story. The existence of the Whitey Bulger story and the FBI corruption and so forth made the Chinese story sort of slide into Boston very easily and believably.
You didn't come here to talk, all right? You came here to get arrested. You got tapes of what? Costello was my informant.
We try to utilize the information we read about as a kind of comfort zone to know that a lot of the stuff was factual. Because if somebody had written that, I said, no, come on, that's just too much. It's too much.
Yeah, this story is wilder than fiction. It is the Angels with Dirty Faces stories. I mean, there is, many families in South Boston, you would have a priest in the family, but oftentimes there was this, the gangster in the family, the sort of black sheep of the family.
Like the Bulgers, both extremely capable, intelligent men. I think they both understood the use of power. Billy chose to use it politically to his advantage, into his own agenda, where Jimmy opted for the opposite, that he could obtain power through his use of force and a gun.
Whitey Bulger's brother, Billy Bulger, was the Senate president and probably the most powerful politician in Massachusetts. You had two brothers who grew up in the same household in South Boston. Both had risen to the top of their chosen professions. One was a politician and one was a gangster.
Triple O's, I started working down there on St. Patrick's Day. I mean, Whitey Bulger used to come in the bar on the weekends, and he paid more and more interest in me and the way I conducted myself at fights that I was involved in, and just basically how I handled myself throughout the night. And we became closer and closer. And eventually I went to work for him. I was 18 years old when I came around him. And, after I really got associated with him, I started making good money, big money. And, everything comes with it, like in the movies, the respect, the power, whatever, but the money. And the adrenaline, the rush of doing things, it was strong.
I knew Mr. Bulger. I know all of the Bulgers. I had no idea that he was involved in murder. I thought he was involved in the numbers.
He was very careful in trying to sort of present himself as this good bad guy, somebody who, was keeping the drugs out of Southie. But in fact, that really was a myth.
He spread that. That was his own propaganda machine. No, he would spread those feel-good stories about himself to make himself look like something that he wasn't. He did nothing unless it made him look good or benefited him financially. If he was helping some elderly woman with groceries, you can bet she had a nice-looking granddaughter someplace. He did nothing out of kindness.
Over the course of the 70s and 80s, Jimmy Bulger and Stephen Flemmi essentially assumed control of the Boston underworld. They did it in a twofold manner. They were extremely treacherous, violent individuals. Whitey in particular enjoyed nothing better than a good killing. But Flemmi was somebody that was ruthless. It was not uncommon that Bulger and Flemmi would have disputes amongst themselves as to, you know, who would get to kill so-and-so.
Whitey and Stevie, they really were and are a cancer. We had our own rules. We had our own boundaries. There were certain things we wouldn't do. There was nothing they wouldn't do.
They had also managed to infiltrate the organized crime unit of the FBI and use them to their advantage. And this allowed them to flourish for many, many years.
As I progressed, the crimes became more and more violent, where, you know, you're beating people more vicious and stuff, and it's just baby steps, until finally you're involved in, you know, the ultimate crime of murder.
In the early 80s, this building here became like a symbol of the Irish Mafia. Around 1984 is when Whitey Bulger and his associates kind of muscled their way in and took over the store. And Whitey kind of made it like his Mafia headquarters in a way, or at least that's what it became known for. It was called the South Boston Liquor Mart. And everybody kind of knew, you know, if, you know, Whitey was in there. You know, I think he had meetings in the back room.
Whitey Bulger was more or less the most important, most powerful gangster in Boston at the time. That led basically to me asking, you know, well, why, how come there haven't been cases made against Whitey? And said to a few people here that, you know, I think Whitey's a rat. It's the only explanation why he hadn't been taken down. And it wasn't what I thought, it was just what was being told to me by people, particularly in law enforcement, that Whitey Bulger had this relationship with the FBI that protected him. In 1988, we have our Spotlight team here is basically an investigative unit, and we put in play the whole idea that maybe we can go out there and find out what this relationship with Bulger is, kind of put it on record.
And in part, the reason that he was able to become so successful and really control most of the illegal rackets in Boston was because of his relationship with an agent at the FBI, an agent named John Connolly, who grew up in the same neighborhood. It really comes back to South Boston and the roots that they developed as children, you know, growing up in the same housing project. John says it was because he was the hometown agent that he was able to recruit the hometown gangster, and that there was a trust there, that Whitey Bulger knew that if he were to serve as an informant for John Connolly, another Southie guy, that he would never hurt him.
And who's really culpable here in this relationship? You know, FBI, the gangsters, it all goes together. It's mind-boggling, and it's almost totally unbelievable.
December 23rd, 1994, an FBI agent came down the store and told me that there was indictments coming down, they were imminent, and I got a hold of Whitey, and he took off that day.
The fact that he is still out there today as the #2 most wanted on the FBI's list, second only to Osama bin Laden, speaks for itself.
Well, I think the turning point within Bulger's gang was in 1998 when the informant files of Whitey Bulger and Stevie Flemmi were made public. Other members of the gang were just felt so betrayed. They didn't know that Whitey was an informant.
Treachery, double dealing, backstabbing, paranoia. He had that mindset. Now we know why he was like that. He had to keep everyone at each other's throats because he was a rat.
We all believed we were paying for the information, and that goes for everyone that was with us, that we were, you know, paying law enforcement for information.
In Irish culture, an informer is the worst thing you could be, and you know, that still carries over to a certain extent.
I think the most damaging aspect of that revelation was that people now had to ponder that everything this guy stood for was a lie. I mean, he became the mother of all rats.
Stevie Flemmi, who had been captured and was awaiting trial, launched this sort of novel defense, which was, We were FBI informants. We had immunity. We were promised that as long as we provided information that we would not be prosecuted. But at that point, they weren't charged with murder and he wasn't admitting murders.
While I was on the street, I was walking a thin line because if Stevie Flemmi cooperated, I'd be indicted for murders. And when I got arrested in '99, my option was spend life in prison or I could be out on the street. And the two guys that were giving up everybody would be in prison. Part of my agreement with the government is basically as a sign of good faith, I led them to 3 bodies that people that we had killed and buried. And that was the start of it, and subsequently I led them to 3 more grave sites.
Tus trailers, visita mi canal.
The judge took into consideration my cooperation, and I was sentenced to 6 years.
And there was nothing that was more sort of stunning than the discovery that he actually had killed women.
In the case of the 2 girls, Deborah Hussey was the daughter of Stevie Flemmi's common-law wife. Apparently, he began a sexual relationship with her when she was young, say teenage. When she was 26 years old, she indicated that she was going to go public with that, and Stevie wasn't going to allow that to happen. Deborah Davis was a little different. Unfortunately for her, she got involved in Stevie when she was 17 years old. An extremely beautiful young girl was involved with him up until the same age as Deborah Hussey, 26 years old, when she reportedly met someone else. Well, his ego wouldn't allow that.
Hope ran out today for the family of Deborah Davis, the former girlfriend of reputed mob boss Stephen the Rifleman Flemmi.
There's no ending your relationship on your terms with them. They'll end the relationship, and usually it's done through murder.
And so until they started digging up their bodies, I think there was a lot of denial. But once that happened, I think there was this sort of recognition. It was pretty hard to deny that they were bad guys. But there was still people in South Boston who would defend Whitey Bulger.
I'd say 6 or 7 months ago, this older woman walked up. She said, Brian, she said, I wish Whitey was still here. And I looked at her and I said, why would you want why would you want Whitey to be here? She said, because when Whitey was here, there were no drugs in the town. You know, and that's still the perception some people have, not majority people anymore. You know, a lot of people in this town now understand fully what Whitey Bulger was about, and we're ashamed of it.
The backbone of Southie's always been the working families, the mothers and fathers who stayed together, raised their families, the guys who stayed home. We were the flash. We were the guys that got all the bad press and gave Southie sort of a reputation it didn't entirely deserve.
The town is made up of saints and sinners, like every other town across America.
People would attack me in the 80s writing these stories about criminals in South Boston. It was, unavoidable fact. It existed there. But the reality is South Boston is a beautiful place. Some of the best people I've ever met in this town are from South Boston. So I think it is unfair but that's just the way it goes. I mean, gangsters are sexy. I mean, it's the reason why, everybody wants to see Scorsese's next movie. It's because people are interested in it. But it's obviously just one slice of South Boston.
We tried never to really make, I'm sure there'll be a lot of films based on Bulger and coming up, because it's a fascinating story. And particularly the FBI element is fascinating. When you talk about good people trying to do a good thing and winding up doing terrible things, it's like, where's the gray line here? Where's the grayness? I mean, how gray could it get in terms of morality, black and white? There isn't any. It's all gray.
South Boston my whole life. It's just great place to be. One of my good friends has a cigarette in his nose behind me.
Getting back to Southie, We love it. This is where we bond, you know?